Welcome to ACC Nation. I'm Jim Quist, and our special guest is Sam Neumann of Clemson Insider. Thanks for joining us, Sam.
Thanks for having me back. I'm glad to be back with you guys.
Got a lot of sports to go over here, especially football. So let's just jump right into the football end of things. A lot of disruption in the force in Clemson, and so let's just get your thoughts generally on everything that has happened, and then we'll get into a little more detail about what to expect.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just going kind of back to when, the coaching changes happen. It's not, I mean, with Venables and Tony Elliott, it was one of those things that was a matter of like, okay, it's going to happen, but when? And then everything kind of hit at once. And then you had the athletic director leave too. So it was kind of like, from people looking at the outside in, it was like, wow, this is an absolute disaster. And, things aren't going so well. But I mean, inside of the program, it's a day that Dabo Swinney had prepared for. And, he went and made his hires, and I think they feel pretty good about the direction that they're heading in. And, they have a lot of you're not going to replace Brett Venables overnight. And, Wesley Goodwin is not going to be somebody who's going to step into and be Brett Venables, because he's just, they don't have the same demeanor, but he was his right-hand man for years and years. And, the general reception around the locker room, and, I'm sure people by now have kind of seen the videos on social media where the players carried him up on his shoulders after they won the Cheez-It Bowl. So that's kind of the reaction. So a lot of it from people who don't really know the program too well is like, wow, what's going on at Clemson? The program seems to be in turmoil, blah, blah, blah. And the reality is just, one of those things where it's like, okay, the coordinators we've been lucky enough to keep for years and years, it's, this is probably the most openings that there have been at FBS schools in a long time. I think there was over 20 something openings. So, I mean, when you have those high level coordinators, of course, they're going to get interviews. And I think Tony and Brent both decided that, this was the right opportunity for them and their family. And I think they both ended up in good situations. And then Clemson was able to make some, good hires from within. And, they made an external hire with Nick Eason, who used to play at Clemson, was the Auburn defense line coach. And now looking like he was pretty, he might have had some insight. I don't know, but it looks good on his part considering what's going on at Auburn right now. But I would say the football program is in a better place than people, would have thought it would be, just because again, there's a lot of things going on. But I think just over the past month or so, they've kind of been able to manage things, and they still, even if you want to consider it a down year for Clemson, and whatever you want to say about recruiting rankings, and Clemson has never, even when they won national championships, they never had number one recruiting classes, but they still finished with the top 10 class, and they still won 10 games. So if that's going to be a down season, then so be it. But, I think, the fact of the matter is, a lot of things tend to happen. They're losing their two starting cornerbacks, but then they also, they have a lot of depth at that position. And then at the same time, they're returning Xavier Thomas, they're returning Tyler Davis, they're returning KJ Henry. They might have one of the best defensive lines in all of college football next season. So I think there is a bright outlook there. Which is, I think for, the average fan looking in, they're like, okay, I don't know if this Clemson dynasty is going to go on for too long. But I mean, I think Dabo Swinney's earned a little bit of leadway to say, okay, like let's kind of trust what this guy's going to do. His track record kind of speaks for itself, right?
Yeah, as a head coach, he has certainly shown that he has a lot of managerial skills that people really want in that position, by the fact that, as you point out, he had people lined up and ready to go. Mm-hmm. And again, we've always heard that next man up, and basically for players at Clemson, right? Well, here you go. Here's your coaches, next man up. You've got it in-house, ready to go. And that seems to be working out. So when we talk about these guys who've taken over, Will has asked me to ask a couple of questions of you, and this is one that we'll get right into. Mm-hmm. But we see any difference in offensive and defensive schemes with these new coaches this season?
I mean, I think it'll be the same relative, schemes, but but Goodwin and Streeter are gonna add some concepts of their own. Goodwin and Venables are a right-hand man, so I don't think it would be, too potent to say that, okay, they're going to run similar things, but Goodwin's going to add some wrinkles of his own in there. And then, Brandon Streeter was a quarterbacks coach for Tony Elliott, so I'm sure they had some same offensive philosophies, but then Brandon Streeter was also an offensive coordinator at Liberty in Richmond, where he, did a pretty solid job there. So I think he's going to add in his own offensive tendencies. He's adding their playbooks. I think overall, the offense and defense that they run is going to be pretty similar, but there's going to be, different aspects that these coaches might want to include. So it's not like a team's going from playing like a 3-4 to a 4-3. Like they're going to continue to do what they do on both sides of the ball. And like I said, I think it's just going to be these guys, adding some things that, they want to add into. So I don't think there's going to be that identity change and that you may see sometimes when you promote, but when you have a change there. But I usually when you promote from within, there's not too much of a philosophy change going on there.
So we'll get a better feel, I guess, by the time we hit spring practice and the spring game. We get a much better, clearer picture of what to expect out of Clemson this season and kind of moving forward. And one of the big questions, again, this is a will question for you. Will DJ get pushed by the incoming freshman, Cade?
I think it's hard, it's hard to say. I think it's going to be DJ's job coming into the spring. And all indications point to that Cade is a competitor, and he's going to be a kid that is going to compete his butt off and come in there. And yeah, he could push, but I think at the end of the, I think we have to realize that, DJ is very talented and he's working hard this offseason to get back to where he needs to be. And, there were some factors in there this past season that, didn't really get talked about, but I think, Cade definitely has a chance to push it. I don't want to sit here and say, yeah, he's going to push him and, they're going to be fighting for the starting job. I think it's kind of just like you look at it as like, okay, this is DJ's job and they're going to give Cade an opportunity, to kind of show what he's made of. And obviously, he goes down as one of the greatest quarterbacks to ever play at his high school, if not the best. And that's a high school that produced guys like Sam Ehlinger, Drew Brees, and Nick Foles. And, he's one of the, I'm not going to sit here and say he's the best quarterback in Texas high school state history, because that, that's a long list. But, in recent times, he sure is. And he is a winner and went out a winner. And, he's got a very impressive resume coming into college. And DJ came in when he had a 5-star in front of him, and granted, Trevor Lawrence is a fresh when he took over starter, played significantly better than DJ, but I think he won 10 games. This is still his team, and he's going to have a hold on the job until he doesn't.
Interesting. Just off the top of your head, based upon the video that you've watched of Cade, and I've watched some too, but I don't spend the amount of time that you do in your position looking at the players as closely. Let's compare Cade for a second to Trevor. And, apples and oranges here. Tell us a little bit about what you feel that Cade is going, because that's the future.
I think Cade's play style it's funny you mentioned Trevor. I think his play style is more similar to that of the quarterback who was drafted right after Trevor, and Zach Wilson from BYU. He can make some off-platform throws. He's a dual threat guy who can use his legs and, I think his arm talent might not be the same of Trevor's and DJ just in terms, but, he can still make all the throws. And I think he's a very accurate and precise passer. But he's a pretty polished prospect, but in terms of play style, I think he's closer to Zach Wilson than he is to Trevor Lawrence, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because I think you get to see, if and when he does command the offense, maybe some more utilization of him being a dual threat factor. So in today's age, not to start comparing to Patrick Mahomes and whatnot, but Patrick Mahomes has created the notion that, like, hey, you don't need to be, not created the notion, but you don't need to be a pocket passer, right? If you can, it doesn't have to look pretty, but if you can make those throws thrown off your, if you can make those throws thrown off wherever, make them. But yeah, no, I think Cade is somebody who can make plays happen and kind of thrives off of chaos. And maybe something that you need in a college quarterback is somebody who can just make the throws that need to be made, and kind of, not when the pocket collapses, you don't necessarily collapse too. And I think, I've talked to him a good bit, and that's kind of what he talked about, was those off platform throws, and kind of thriving off of chaos. So, interesting to see how he does playing in this Clemson offense, but I think he's a guy who can definitely be utilized in a number of ways, and he's not somebody who's just going to stand like a statue in the pocket.
It's encouraging. And speaking of Trevor Lawrence, have you by any chance become a Jacksonville Jaguars fan?
I'm believe it or not, I'm actually a New York Jets fan, so that's kind of why I brought up the Zach Wilson
Gotcha.
comparison. But I'm not, I by no means a Jaguars fan. But I still follow them pretty closely now that Trevor, and obviously, well, hopefully Travis Etienne gets back healthy this season. But yeah, no, I think just mentioning that, and the Jaguars, I think, you know, we're looking at it, maybe what, two maybe a month ago, 2 months ago, and looking at the situation, and they're like, wow, this might be one of the worst situations in football. And their owner isn't great, and the general manager is, a lot of guys didn't want to work for him, but to get a Super Bowl winning coach, and there's a history with quarterbacks, and got the most out of Carson Wentz, who's kind of been, I don't think we have to say it, we kind of know, but yeah, I think Trevor, that marriage is something to be encouraged about if you're a Clemson fan and also a Jaguars fan. And I think a lot of Clemson fans have started to follow the Jaguars, especially, not getting in that situation, but especially because Deshaun Watson is not playing right now. And yeah, no, I think they could have done a lot worse to bring in a guy like Doug Peterson to work with Trevor Lawrence. And obviously his rookie season wasn't pretty, but I think we have, because of guys like, Justin Herbert, and I'm drawing a blank on the other one, or maybe the way Mac Jones played this year, people have this false conception that, like, a rookie quarterback needs to come in and play spectacular. No, there's going to be growing pains. The NFL isn't easy. So I think, Trevor showed flashes, but then he also showed signs of, like, hey, he's not really playing with a great team around him. And not to mention, was his coach all the way in there? I don't really think so. So, he showed those flashes, but obviously we know how talented he can be. And just the hope is that they're able to build around him this offseason, and that, Doug Peterson can put him in situations to succeed and get the most out of him.
Hey, and not to diss on Urban, but glad he's gone. Speaking of Deshaun, where do you think he's going to end up?
That's really tough to say. I think that's $1 million question, right? I think pretty much every reporter that's associated with the Texans has said that, he probably won't play another down for them. So, the expert guess to say, hey, like, maybe he'll go play for Carolina, but in that, would be the fit, because he's from South Carolina. It's not, but the Panthers don't exactly have the draft capital to make that trade. And then you start having to trade some of your quality players, and then you're like, okay, why are we trading for a quarterback? I think the team that makes a lot of sense, that, maybe they end up with the sweepstakes. This is just me throwing the name of the hat that I'd like to see is potentially the Tampa Bay Bucks, with Tom Brady retiring. You can't really discount every team that needs a quarterback right now, right? Because it's kind of a league where it's unless you have a quarterback or you don't. It's kind of the haves and haves not. So, obviously his legal situation is getting, needs to get settled and get that cleared up. I don't have I won't pretend to have a whole lot of knowledge on the situation, so I don't want to exactly, touch on that. But obviously it's a touchy subject, and there's a reason he didn't play. So, maybe if he gets reinstated, I think there's a chance that any team that needs a quarterback is going to be after him, because after all, I mean, he's a talented, we know how talented he can be. He's a winner. Was a winner in college, but I mean, when you look at the fact that he was able to go to the playoffs with with Bill O'Brien, I think people are like, oh wow, that might be a more impressive feat than we once thought, just considering, he kind of did everything he did to not even, I don't think he was doing it on purpose, but self-sabotage that team. And now he's you know, you know how it works. But
Yep.
yeah, like I said, I think any team that needs a quarterback is going to be interested in him. But I think I think honestly, you could probably say three teams from the NFC South might be interested in him for I don't know if the Saints have the draft capital or the cap space, but like them, the Panthers and Bucks all need a quarterback. So if he's going to stay in the Southeast area, it all kind of makes sense, right? So
Exactly. Exactly. Sorry to kind of get off track here and get into the NFL, but it's nice to talk about some of these players that Clemson fans
absolutely. And then
actually.
you have three Clemson players playing, or four playing this weekend, and then five if as Dabo Sweeney wants to count Marion Hobby, the defensive line coach there. So you can't really go without missing them, right? So
That's right. That's right. It's all good. Let's get back to what's going on in the ACC with Clemson. Um, things are changing slowly but surely in the ACC. I think there is a level of parity. It's been coming for a long time. Clemson is, or at least this past season, was no longer top dog, and we saw more teams starting to emerge. And I think that's going to be the trend of emerging teams. Not that Clemson won't be the top dog, but that there are more teams emerging. So let's take a look at the Atlantic for a second and sort of analyze who is Clemson's biggest threat in the Atlantic for this season and maybe even the future.
well, that's an interesting question because right, that I mean, we coming into this season or this past season, everybody thought Clemson was going to run away with that, right? And to kind of just see the way that it turned into, it was like, wow, okay. Um, I'm trying to get, it all blends together. So let me get these teams together in my head and not mention wrong ones. Yeah. So the Atlantic, I think you have to obviously mention Wake Forest just after the season that they had. There's a lot of, I mean, if we're being honest, I think the only team you probably can discount as being a factor is probably Syracuse. But Wake Forest, I mean, Clemson handled them pretty well, but they're bringing almost everybody. Their whole coaching staff is returning. Which there was rumors that Hartman might go elsewhere, but he obviously elected to contracted or the head coach Clausen, and then Hartman, it came back. Then you can't discount NC State, who played very well this season, and Doran got a contract extension. Devin Leary, I like what I saw out of Louisville when I was down there for that game, and Malik Cunningham is, he's not Lamar Jackson, but he's very slippery and is the type of player that I think you can win with there. And Louisville's, really picked up in recruiting, and they just picked up a 4-star quarterback and might land another 4-star receiver, some big names. And then can't discount Florida State. And I think we want to, but you know what, at the beginning of the last season, you're like, wow, this team we were looking at it as like, is Mike Norvell really going to last the entire season here? And then they kind of got things turned around. So maybe they're trending in the right direction. And then, Boston College is bringing back Jerkovich and as their quarterback. And I really like what Hafley's doing there. So I think there's a lot of teams that can be threats. And I honestly, just in my heart of hearts and what I believe is I think NC State might be, their biggest threat. And then Wake Forest. Clemson, even though they handled Wake Forest pretty easily, Wake Forest still won the Atlantic and they lost to Pitt in the ACC championship game. But I mean, I don't think even though Clemson was able to handle them, I think Wake Forest is still going to be able to do what they did last season and put up a significant amount of points, just because not every defense that you're going to face is like Clemson's, right? And so I think those are definitely their two top teams that they're going to go up against. I think Boston College kind of sneaks in there as well, but that kind of remains to be seen. Their defense was not good this past season, and then they lost their quarterback to an injury, but they still managed to finish 6-6. So it's kind of a matter of staying healthy for that team. But I think I don't want to be somebody to say, well, every team is here, but I think we can, even though Boston College went 2-6, you kind of have to, in the ACC, you kind of have to look at it as like, okay, well, they lost their starting quarterback and their backup is a guy who's been here for 4 years, but he's a backup for a reason. So, but I think you can look at last year's numbers to kind of give you a sense of where things might go. But I think, like I said, I don't want to be somebody who leaves the door open for everybody, but I feel like you can leave the door open for most teams except Syracuse. But I still expect NC State and Wake Forest to kind of be those two teams that might give Clemson some trouble.
It's worth giving a watch this year. I think it's going to be different than what we've seen in the past, just from what I'm observing from back, looking from the outside, looking in, because we look at everybody, and I would agree with you on Syracuse. I really have no idea what's going on there, but let's move into basketball here. Let's talk a little bit about what Brad Brownell is doing with the program, or not doing with the program, depending on your perspective here. Here's again that outsider looking in. It kind of astonishes me to some degree, Sam, that the program, and we've had this argument here at ACC Nation over and over again. I just kind of feel like this is a program that should be doing a lot better. And I think that starts with the head coach. And I don't seem to see any changes going on there. Tell us a little bit about your perspective on basketball, what it's doing this season, and the program in general.
Well, I mean, I think you're right. I think this is a program that should be doing a lot better. And we can't say, okay, well, they almost won this game, they almost won that one. But I mean, just looking at things, they started off 4-0, and they're at the Charleston, they're at the Charleston Classic, and I was there, and they played St. Bonaventure, and they had a big lead in the halftime. And this is say what you want, Bonnie's is a great basketball program. They're a top 25 team in the nation. They're ranked number 22. That would have been a chance for Clemson to get a quad one win, especially on a neutral site, and get the season off to a good start. They end up losing that game by 3 points, and it kind of fell apart at the end. And that kind of became a thematic element to this season, to where they couldn't play complete games. And maybe you want to put that in coaching, I don't know. But at first, you looked at this team and what they have and their pieces, and you're like, okay, like this is Brett Burnell and his staff are doing a great job of getting these guys to play together and play well. And then all of a sudden things kind of just, fell apart. They also had a lead against West Virginia, and they should have won that game. They led that game by as many as 12 points, and they lost by 7. And then, the only game that I really look at that they were never in was that Rutgers game. And okay, but if you win the St. Bonaventure game and you win West Virginia, obviously they wouldn't have played West Virginia if they beat St. Bonaventure, but that's besides the point. Then you would go to Rutgers and you say, what not? Then they have the chance to kind of rewrite things after those 3 losses, and they go to Miami and for the first ACC game, and they led in that game, should have won that game. Things fell apart at the end. Have bounced back, went on the road against Drake. Drake is a good basketball team. And then, they beat Miami, Ohio. They take care of business against South Carolina. Then they go and win at Virginia. And like, okay, they're starting to get things turned around. And then the month of January just wasn't kind to them. And I think, after seeing them play at Duke, everybody was like, this is a team that can go toe to toe with any team, in the country. And I don't want to say like any team in the country, because, that's hyperbole, but Duke is one of the best teams in the nation, and they took it to them at Cameron, and they arguably could have won that game. But you start off with a game you should have won in the month of January against Virginia. They lose that game, and they beat NC State, and then they get walloped at Notre Dame. Then they lose. Then they drop. We're winning by 20-something and drop a game at home against Boston College. Then they lose to Syracuse. Then they lose. Then they beat Pittsburgh, and then they lose at Duke. And I'm not going to recap the entire schedule, but you see that kind of element there where they take care of business, and then all of a sudden they're on a run, and then they drop a game, and it kind of catapults. And there's a lot of winnable games that they've had kind of let slip away. I think the only two you can kind of looked at, okay, is Notre Dame. For me, the games I look at that they probably couldn't have won just based off how they played was Rutgers and Notre Dame. The rest of them, they were in every single game and had leads in a lot of these games. And it's, I mean, I don't want to sit here and criticize the head coach. My knowledge of the basketball program goes just this season, and I haven't had that time to sit down and really go back and evaluate what everything Brad Burnell has done with this program. But his words, not mine. They talked about when they kind of got it handed to them defensively against Syracuse, when they give up 91 points on the road to Jim Boeheim's team. And granted, Syracuse has a lot of good players. They're a good team, and they made some tough shots in that game. But he was like, he kind of questioned the recruiting and the toughness of the team. And then they came out and held Pittsburgh to 48 points. So, there's a lot of questions that may arise, and definitely I have some as well, because it's a confusing team, because they'll go beat Florida State at home, big victory. And then when you're on that, have a chance to kind of make something of yourselves, they go to Georgia Tech and they drop a game. And yes, Georgia Tech is a good team. They made the tournament last season, right? And I like their head coach and what the direction of that program. But if you're a program who wants to make the tournament, you have games that you can drop, and drop those games. It's hard to really reconcile with. And at this point in the season, they're 12-11, 4-8 in ACC play. And I have the schedule up in front of me. They have Duke, Notre Dame, Florida State, Louisville, Wake Forest, Boston College. So unless they go 5-0, they're going to finish under 500 in ACC play. And there's a very good chance that they could finish under 500 or record. And, I'm not going to sit here and make excuses, but I think their season really took a turn for the worst when, Hunter Tyson broke his clavicle. UNC ended up beating them. They were able to hold their own in the second half, but just that lack of depth they have in the front court kind of came. I mean, when you have two true freshmen out there at forward, against a team like UNC, it's going to be hard. And you can definitely just watch by being out there, like, okay, this guy probably doesn't belong being out there. But do you have a choice? When somebody like Ben Middlebrooks, and I don't want to sit here and criticize Ben. It's obviously not easy to be a true freshman, especially a guy who reclassified and probably didn't expect to play this season. But he's in there, and this was a season that you would have hoped that. For me, my expectations weren't high, but after a couple games in, and the way that they played in that first half against St. Bonaventure, you're like, okay, they lost to a tournament team for a reason. But then things kind of springboarded from there, and they continued to get worse. And after a 4-0 start, they've gone 7-11, and dropped a lot of important ACC games that they should have won. So right now, I don't think they're playing it for anything other than pride. I think it's very tough for you and I to sit here and say, yeah, they can rifle off these 5 or 6 games that they have left, go undefeated, and especially without Hunter Tyson, and make a run. But I think unfortunately for them, their best chance of probably making the tournament right now is winning the conference tournament, and that's not something that that I think that only happens so often where a team can make a run and whatnot, especially when you have the Dukes and the Wake Forests of the world, and Wake Forest has 21 this season. Sometimes those teams just don't let up in conference tournaments. So it's difficult to sit here and talk about those should-haves and would-haves and the what ifs. And I think we know what Clemson is missing here. And this, when you look at the team and the way that they've played for much of the season, it's kind of confusing, because you're like, this should be a tournament team, but they're not. And I think, Brad Burnell made the tournament last year, and he just signed a contract extension. So it's kind of up to the new AD. They kind of determine what they want that future to be. But, I think they have to realize that I think they do realize, and we'll have to see going forward that, this kind of isn't good enough. And you have to finish game. It's so simple, so cliche, but you got to play the full 40 minutes. And I think that's just something they haven't been able to do consistently this season. And unfortunately, it's kind of, bit them in the rear, and that's kind of why they're at where they're at. And we can sit here and say, oh, they should be there, but they're not. And it's unfortunate, but it's kind of their reality.
Yeah, unfortunately. And from my perspective, I look at the history of Tigers basketball under Brunell, and from my perspective, I think he is sitting on a hot seat. And even though he had a contract extension, I think he'll be lucky if he gets another season, to be frank. at some point, I think fresh blood needs to come into the picture, both from the coaching perspective and the recruiting perspective. That's my thoughts. We'll move on from basketball into a quick look at baseball. Just some thoughts on what the baseball team looks like this season.
Well, I mean, it's hard to kind of go from where they were last year. I mean, when we talked to, the manager, Monte Lee, at the beginning of the year, they went 25-27, which is not, the norm for him. And certainly his predecessor, the first losing season Lee had his 13 years as head coach, and things kind of boiled over and frustrated. You kind of had some guys leave, and, before he took over as coach, Jack Leggett, as we know, 21 NCAA tournament berths, 11 super regionals, and 6 trips to the College World Series, and they kind of just haven't reached that. And last season was the program's first losing record since 1957. I don't think many people know that. And they missed out in the NCAA tournament for the first time in nearly 12, 13 years. So it's only up from there. They had the second lowest batting average in the ACC last year, and highest earned run average. I think the thing they have to hang their hat on is, Mac England decided to come back. He was drafted, I think, I might be mistaken, but I think he was drafted in the 13th round by the Washington Nationals, or something like that. But he elected to stay, and he's going to be their ace. And then Caden Grice is going to be a one-way player. I don't think he's going to be pitching for them. So those are 2 guys you can hang their hat on. And then you have, arguably somebody who's going to be one of the best baseball players in the ACC when he's healthy is Will Taylor. He could have been drafted in the first round of the MLB draft if there were talks of it, if he wasn't committed to Clemson and playing football. And the Rangers did drafting him as kind of a whatever. Sometimes teams will throw darts out there to see but he obviously is committed to Clemson. And last year wasn't good enough. They've taken responsibility for that. So this season is about turning things around, and I can't talk about Monte Lee's job status because frankly, we don't know what Graham Neff is thinking, the athletic director, in terms of what the expectations are for this team and whatnot. But they just have to be better than having the second lowest batting average and one of the highest earned run averages. I mean, when your pitching staff has over a 5 ERA, you're not hitting. It's just not. It's sit here and simple, but you're just not going to win games, right? You kind of have to score more runs than you give up. So baseball is something that I'm getting into, and I'm still fairly new on the Clemson beat. I've been here since June, but this is our first time leaning into baseball, and you have to lean your full self into football and basketball. But obviously, like, they, plain and simple, they have to be better than they were last year, because it's I don't think many people realize this. Maybe the average fan, and not necessarily something that I knew. But this is a pretty storied program, a baseball program, and they have a great history. And winning was something that came accustomed to. And Radakovich, who is now at Miami, he fired Jack Leggett, even though maybe he kind of deserved a little bit more time because they weren't getting past certain rounds. And Monte Lee hasn't been able to kind of live up to that. So it's kind of hard to see the direction that the baseball program took last year, but maybe they can help turn it around. I think it's kind of difficult to see just because I don't think a lot of people saw last season coming and kind of the way that it developed. So I guess, we kind of see how they respond to the adversity that they faced last season.
I'll tell you what, you talk about a storied program, you hit that on that nail on the head, because Clemson baseball has just been incredible to watch. And under Jack Leggett, phenomenal run. And Monte Lee had big shoes to fill there. And I figured it would take him some time, but maybe not as long as it's taking. Hopefully he'll get a little more time, because it does take some time in baseball to build things back up. Hey, Sam, thank you so much for joining us and talking about Clemson football, basketball, baseball, and delving a little bit into the NFL as well after taking a road trip down to Alabama to take care of recruiting responsibilities for Clemson Insider. Man, lots of stuff on your plate, and we look forward to having you again and talking more about what's going on at Clemson. Sam Neumann from Clemson Insider, our guest. Thank you, sir, for coming into ACC Nation.
Thanks so much for having me, Jim. Look forward to returning hopefully in the future.